Reduce anxiety. So stay tuned. This is the second video on anxiety. And as you saw before, we talked a little bit about where does anxiety come from, the sources of anxiety. And I outlined the fact that it can come from two primary places, essentially. One is through present-day circumstances, present-day impacts, things that are happening right now that cause anxiety. So sort of problematic situations, things that that are tangible, that you can understand and see happening, like a job loss or a debt or a relational problem breakdown or something like that, or world events, things that are happening to you at the moment that cause anxiety or reactions in you that look like anxiety. The other part that I mentioned where it might be a source of anxiety comes from historical impacts, those things in our past that have affected us over the long term, things that might be way past when we were children, or our family experiences, or experiences at school, or bad things that might have happened, potentially traumatic events that affected us, that are still around in our consciousness and affect us by an anxious orientation, but also that can be triggered through present day circumstances and stress and so on. So those two sources of anxiety are different, but they're also connected. In this particular video, I wanted to give you just a quick 4-step technique that can get you to diffuse anxiety when it does emerge, or when you feel like it's out of your control and it's starting to affect how you function in the day, how you're able to get things done, or what decisions you need to make, or so on. Or if it's just distressing physically for you, you're having physical symptoms of anxiety, maybe agitation or hypervigilance or difficulty sleeping. So some of those anxiety reactions, those are real physical symptoms that are activated through the mind. And they're not just through the mind, but through interpretation in the mind. So when you have an anxiety reaction, you're viewing an event and you're sizing it up. You're trying to understand what's going on. And your mind automatically is trying to determine what's happening. And particularly if what's happening is a threat to you. If it is a threat, then your mind will automatically activate what's called a threat system in your body. And that's a protective element for you. It's very biological. But sometimes it shows up disproportionately, shows up maybe at the wrong time. And so our anxiety reactions tend to take over our physical state, exacerbates our mental state as well. So it's important to try to diffuse anxiety where it's appropriate, when possible. And in modern day society, a lot of times the threats that we're experiencing are not necessarily life-threatening. Being chased by a wild animal or something like that, that might happen, but generally it's not. It's generally something to do with people, places, time, decisions, how you come across to others, things happening in the world. They're not necessarily a threat to you imminently, but perceptually they're a threat, and they still bring out these kinds of symptoms. So step 1 in my 4-step method, again in terms of just a simple way to diffuse anxiety initially. The first step is to breathe. And the reason I say breathe is because, as I just described, anxiety is very physical in nature. And so you want to try to calm the physicality of it. And breathing is the best possible way to do that. It happens quite quickly, the reduction in the physical elements of anxiety. So just take a deep breath, blow, and immediately you'll sense some calm. And the second step in the process, and I would do it right away while you're breathing, ask the question, why am I anxious? Okay? Oftentimes we go through entire days feeling anxious about all kinds of things, but we're not exactly sure which thing we're actually anxious about. What is it that's particularly anxiety producing? In fact, sometimes feeling anxiety becomes the thing we're anxious about. We become fearful of the symptoms of anxiety rather than fearful of what the origins of anxiety might have been. So it takes on a life of its own. So it's important if you breathe and then you ask the question, why am I anxious? You start the process of trying to uncover and get a grip on what's happening. The third step is following asking the question, and depending upon what your answer is, the third step is to narrow the scope of the answer. So if you ask the question, why am I anxious? And your immediate answer is, life is horrible, or I'm having a terrible day. That's not really an answer that you can do anything about because it's quite generalized. So narrow the scope. Try to understand what may have set you off in that particular day or that particular hour or that particular week. So there might have been something that happened. If you really think about it, it might help you to understand the follow-on emotions from that event. So it could have been a conversation you had that was disturbing you. It could be something you read online. It could be an upcoming event you're maybe not sure about, or a decision that you have to make, or it could be an outstanding debt or something like that. So I think if you can narrow the scope of asking, when you ask the question, why am I anxious, then you'll find that you can diffuse anxiety by bringing it down to size as much as you possibly can. The final step is to make a plan. So step 4 is to make a plan. So after you've tried to deduce sort of what are you anxious about, and narrowing down the scope of that answer, getting it as close to possible to what maybe something that happened recently or a particular thought pattern that you're on, then make a plan. So if it's something tangible, something that happened, something that needs to be resolved, that you're starting to worry about or be concerned about, then make a plan. Even if it's something simple, even if it's sitting down and writing down a plan is a plan. But more so, if you can start to develop a strategy, kind of think through what's happening. Are there ways that you can take the edge off the anxiety or the situation, make some progress, move forward in a little bit of a way, even if it's small? It gives you a sense of control over the dynamic of what's happening, which is anxiety is a sense of a loss of control. And so to gain some control by making a plan can diffuse anxiety in the moment, because you feel like you've got somewhere to go. Maybe you have some tools that you can use or a handle on the situation, having gone through this 4-step process. So making a plan is the final step, and obviously implementing that plan. And you'll find that in that brief little exercise and little moment, you may find some relief from the anxiety that you're experiencing. So I hope that's been helpful, and I look forward to seeing you again.